Hello, dear students and esteemed learners. Welcome in this fourth lecture of our course on Sociology of Health. The topic that I have covered in this lecture is disease, classification, prevalence, causative agents, and social factors. I'll try to cover all these points within the stipulated time. Now, the concepts that I have covered here is classification of disease, then prevalence of communicable and non-communicable disease at global as well as all India level, then causative agents of disease and social factors of causation of disease. Disease and health problems can be classified in several meaningful ways. Sometimes we classify by making use of certain popular terms like by the organ which is getting affected or the organ system, sometimes by the causative agent, or sometimes by some other agents. So, as mentioned in this slide, often we refer by making use of the name of the organ system like kidney disease, heart disease, respiratory disease, etc. Or sometimes by the causative agent like viral disease, chemical poisoning, physical injury, etc. And sometimes we used to become more specific. We used to identify the specific biological agents like bacterial disease or fungal disease, etc. So these are different ways of referring to disease or classifying the disease. There are certain other agents also which cause and which help in classification of the disease, like the chemical agents, which includes drug, pesticides, industrial chemicals, food additives, etc. And sometimes the physical agents which may cause injury or disease, including various forms of energy such as heat, ultraviolet light, radiation, etc. So these are the various popular ways or approaches of classifying disease. However, within the larger system of medical sciences, and especially in community health, disease is often identified as acute or chronic. And at a larger level, diseases are classified as communicable and non-communicable, or infectious and non-infectious. So the communicable diseases are generally the infectious diseases and the non-communicable are the non-infectious. So these are the existing systems of classification. Now we will talk about communicable or the infectious disease. Communicable diseases are those diseases for which biological agents or their products are the cause and that are transmissible from one individual to another individual. So because they can transmit from one individual to another individual, or they can communicate from one host to another host, this is known as communicable. The disease process begins when the agent is able to lodge and grow within the body of the host. Now, the agent means the agents we were talking about in the previous slides, right? Here we were talking about the chemical agents, physical agents, but we were also talking about the biological agents, right? So, these communicable diseases are often caused by the biological agents. The process of lodgement and growth of a microorganism or viruses in the host is called infection. So that is why these are also known as the infectious disease. Communicable diseases remain an important concern for communities globally, including India. And till few years back, communicable diseases were a huge threat for most of the countries. Although the developed part of the world developed some kind of control over the communicable disease, but the threat of the communicable disease is prevailing globally. We will see the prevalence pattern at global level as well as at India level, and then we will try to have a very comprehensive understanding about the prevalence pattern also. According to World Health Organization, communicable disease including HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, often identified as TB, malaria, viral hepatitis, sexually transmitted infections, and the neglected tropical disease, which are also known as the NTDs, are among the leading causes of death and disability in low income countries and marginalized population. Now, we are actually understanding two things here. One, the names of some of the communicable diseases. Now, what is very important here is this, that these communicable diseases are mainly prevailing in the low income countries and the marginalized population. So there is a link between the communicable disease and level of income of the people, or people who are more marginalized economically and even socio-culturally, they are becoming more vulnerable to that. HIV continues to be a major global public health issue, having claimed 36.3 million lives so far. Then 1.5 million people die from tuberculosis each year, making it the world's second top infectious killer after COVID-19. So COVID-19 we all are aware of, because very recently we had seen this global pandemic. We'll talk about COVID-19 very often when we will refer to certain issues related to communicable disease, etc., because we all are aware of the kind of consequences basically this communicable disease has created. Then children aged under 5 years accounted for 77% of all malaria deaths worldwide in 2020. In the same year, more than 1 billion people were treated for at least one of the 5 NTDs amenable to prevention, control, and elimination. Now, please try to understand this particular line, amenable to prevention, control, and elimination. The communicable diseases are actually preventable in nature because they communicate from one person to another person, and if you can break this cycle of communication, then it will not spread. But unfortunately, at a global level, we can see that there is a huge prevalence. The data that I have used is taken from the website of World Health Organization, and I have given here a link for your reference. Then we come to the non-communicable or non-infectious disease part. NCDs are result of combination of genetic, physiological, environmental, and behavioral factor. So these are different from the communicable disease. These conditions include cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, respiratory disease, and mental health disease. NCDs are one of the major challenge for public health in the 21st century, not only in terms of human suffering they cause, but also the harm they inflict on the socio-economic development of the country. Now we need to understand this aspect again. Basically, when disease occur, then they create multiple types of sufferings. First, for the individuals who get affected by that, and then for the larger society. And for the society, again, they are creating multiple types of problem, including the economic problems, because people who suffer from disease, they are actually part of the workforce. So there are multiple perspectives of development, like economic development, social development, human development, and sustainable development. And we will see this, that in all different strategies of development, actually the death caused by disease is creating a huge problem because that is basically wasting the precious human resources. So the sufferings are actually problematic at multiple levels. Now we will see some of the figures. According to World Health Organization, non-communicable disease including heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and chronic lung disease are collectively responsible for 74% of all deaths worldwide. That means the proportion of the deaths caused by the non-communicable disease at global level is much higher. That is almost three quarter. More than three quarter of all NCD deaths and 86% of the 17 million people who died prematurely or before reaching 70 years of age occur in low and middle income countries. Again, this is very important. Now, you need to remember two things here. One, that the larger segment of the population is getting affected by this non-communicable disease, and then also try to remember this age, 70 years of age, because in a next lecture we'll talk about life expectancy, and then we will see that how this 70 years is related to the prevalence of life expectancy at a global level, or for that matter in the developed countries or the developing countries. So there will be a link. NCDs share 5 major risk factors. That means the non-communicable disease are getting affected by very important factors, some of which are identified here, like tobacco use, physical inactivity, harmful use of alcohol, unhealthy diet, and air pollution. We'll talk about the factors which cause disease in a separate lecture also, but as of now you can remember these facts. Now here is a very comprehensive table, and here we will talk about the prevalence of communicable and non-communicable disease in India. So first, what is the source of this data? This data is taken from ICMR, that is Indian Council of Medical Research, and these are recent data. Basically, this was compiled in 2016. So this is the latest data that is available, which is basically talking about the prevalence at a comprehensive level. Now there are three important things that we will discuss here. First, that which diseases are generally identified as communicable disease. So we can see that HIV/AIDS and tuberculosis, then diarrhea, then lower respiratory and other common infectious diseases, and then the neglected tropical disease and malaria, etc. So these are some of the very important communicable diseases. Then this table also includes basically certain other problems like maternal disorder, neonatal disorder, nutritional deficiencies. So I hope that you have some idea about these things. If you do not have much idea about these terms, then you please wait for the next lecture. There we will talk about these things also when we will discuss the indicators and determinants. So you can take help from that also. Now this is one part, that these are the important communicable disease. Now there is another part which is related to basically the states of India. EAG. You can see this is highlighted here. Empowered action. This is not working. Anyway, empowered action group, and I have defined it, so you can read it. Basically, these are the set of states where the problem related to health is prevailing more, right? So now I come to the broader context. Basically, in this table, there are disease categories and there are percent of death to total deaths. We can see here that the communicable, maternal, neonatal, and nutritional disease in the EAG states, basically they are comprising 34.6% of the total deaths. And then in the northeast states, they are basically comprising 32.1%. But in the other states basically includes the other relatively developed states, that is basically comprising of 20.2% of the total deaths. And at all India level, we can see that this is 27.5%. That means the proportion of communicable maternal, neonatal, and nutritional disease in the lesser developed EAG states is much more. That means death caused because of these communicable and other related diseases is more in the lesser developed states of India. So this data is basically in sync with what we saw at a global level. You can see the prevalence of death caused by other disease in this table. It will not be possible for me to discuss all the diseases individually. Then here we are talking about the non-communicable disease. So the important non-communicable diseases are basically cancer, cardiovascular disease, chronic respiratory disease, then few other diseases that which are basically mentioned in the table. And we can see that again in the EAG states, the proportion of deaths caused because of the non-communicable disease is lesser, that is 55.1%, and in the other states which are relatively developed states are actually it is 68.5. Now let me tell you one very important thing. There is a very important concept, that is the concept of epidemiological transition, right? So at a global level as well as at the all India level, epidemiological transition is taking place. What happens in that situation? Basically, when the death caused by the communicable disease is lesser than the death caused by the non-communicable disease, this is considered as a epidemiological transition. Now, what does it imply? No, it implies basically the state of development, because communicable diseases are actually the preventable disease. So if the ratio of, or if the proportion of death caused by communicable disease is higher, then it indicates that the society is basically very inefficient because it is unable to manage the loss of human lives caused by the communicable disease, which are actually preventable. However, the prevalence of COVID-19 created altogether a different scenario, because the developed part of the world had started to think that they have controlled the prevalence of communicable disease, but COVID has created basically a question mark, and that is basically a point of caution for all of us that the communicable disease may return or come back at any point of time, and those are actually those should be prevented from their occurrence. So let us move to the next part, and here we will talk about the causative agents of disease. That means how diseases are actually caused, right? Although this part is primarily related to the biomedical sciences or medical sciences, because as a student of social science, we cannot understand or establish the causation part. But again, that is very important, because these biological agents, or no matter which kind of agents these are, these operate within the social circumstances or social situations. So what is happening that if there is a presence of one specific causative agent of disease, and if a set of people or a group of people are exposed, then it's not necessary that that causative agent will affect all people in the same way. Not necessarily. Rather, it will not affect the all people in the same way. That means that even if those causative agents have the potential to cause that disease, but they will not, because people are different, their immune system is different, they have very different types of immunity, and that immunity is related to several other things, including their nutritional status, their existing health conditions, and of course all these things depend upon their socio-economic and cultural positioning. And we all understood it during the prevalence of COVID. We all knew that although COVID was infectious, but not every person or family, or for that matter city, got similarly affected by that. No, not necessarily, not at all. That means even if the diseases are caused because of certain specific agents, but the kind of impact that those agents will create will depend upon the socio-cultural environment or the circumstances of the people. And so we need to understand these things. These agents operate in an environment which is dominated by the humans. That is the larger uh, purpose of talking about these things and having that kind of understanding. So I have mentioned some of the top agents here. Let us have a look on that. There are biological agents. These are the living agents of disease like viruses, fungus, bacteria, protozoa. Then nutrient agents. Now this is very important. We'll talk about nutrition maybe at length in a separate lecture. But as of now, we can understand that nutrition is the necessary part of the food that the body is basically making use of. So whenever we eat certain things, the body basically absorbs the specific requirements which are necessary for the survival of the body. And these are basically the carbohydrates, vitamins, mineral, protein, fat, etc. that we all know. Now, any excess or deficiency of the intake of a nutrient element may result in nutritional disorder. So, if we consume some of these nutrients much more than what is required, or if we have some kind of deficiency in these nutrients, in either situation, it will create problem, some kind of disorder, and anemia, goiter, obesity, and vitamin deficiency are some of the very popular basically problems, or you can say the causes of the problems. Anemia in itself is one of the big reason of health related problems among women, not only in India but at a larger level, global level. Then there are physical agents like exposure to excessive heat, cold, humidity, then pressure, radiation, electricity, sound, etc. All these things basically create some kind of problem, and these are basically the physical agents. Then there are chemical agents basically, and chemical agents are operating at two levels. There are the endogenous, which basically uh, origin within the body, such as jaundice or ketosis or few other problems that I have mentioned in the slides. You can see. And then there are certain other problems or chemicals which are exogenous, which exist outside the human body, and they affect us externally, like the allergens, then certain metal, dust particle, certain gases, insecticides, etc. And we all know that use of insecticides, pesticides have increased very rapidly. So these are the various agents. Now, along with these, there are actually very important social agents. You can see that there are point number 3, 4, and then 6. Basically, point number 5 is missing, but sometimes it happens when we handle these things, auto correction kind of things basically do take place. Now, the social agents are very important. For example, poverty, hunger, food adulteration, illiteracy, smoking, abuse of drugs and alcohol, unhealthy lifestyle, social isolation, then maternal deprivation. All these are the social situations or the social agents which create circumstances in which we become more susceptible to certain disease, and very often to the communicable one and very often to the non-communicable one. So basically there are certainly important physical, chemical or biological agents, but those agents also get affected by or influenced by the social agents, because the statistics do talk about that. We have seen in the previous slides that the prevalence pattern of the communicable and the non-communicable disease are basically related to the socio-economic status of the various countries. So on the basis of that empirical observation, we are talking about these things. Now we come to the social factors of causation of disease. So there are many social factors which are actually playing very important role in the causation of disease, like the lifestyle factors. For example, use of tobacco or alcohol or poor diet or basically lack of exercise. All these things are creating a kind of lifestyle which is not very good for a good health, right? Because we all understand the metabolism and other processes which take place inside the body. So lifestyle factors do play very important role in causation of certain disease, and diabetes is something which is well known to all of us. Obesity is increasingly becoming a great threat for the population almost world over. Then there are basically social situation in which people live, like social classes, caste, ethnicity, etc. And all these factors play very important role in locating a specific socio-economic status, in giving a specific socio-economic status to people. And because of that particular socio-economic status, people get exposed to the different agents. Let me give you one example. Pollution is one important chemical agent, but not everybody is getting equally affected by that. People who are living in those areas where there is more pollution will get affected by that more adversely. Then you can see any other thing like water. People who have access to safe drinking water, they will not develop the kind of waterborne disease in comparison to people who are not having access to safe drinking water, or for that matter sanitation. There are certain neighborhood where there is no facility of public sanitation. In that situation, people living in that particular area will become more vulnerable to certain communicable disease. So the social situation of people is very important when we try to see the causation of the disease. So this is all that I wanted to talk about today in this lecture. And now these are the references and recommended readings. The references that I have used, or some of the references which are very important if you want to study those at a comprehensive level, these topics at a comprehensive level. And then before I close this, think about this problem. So I have added one simple question here, one simple situation here, which states in India have high prevalence of disease and why. Think about this. And then an activity question. What is this? Which interventions you suggest for reducing the prevalence of communicable disease in India? So you are already familiar with these things by now. So you can attempt to write the answer of this question. So with this, I close this lecture. We will meet in the next lecture. And till then, take care. Have a nice day. Bye.